2 Years Before the Mast by Richard Henry Dana. Introductory note. Richard Henry Dana, the second of that name, was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, August 1st, 1815. He came of a stock that had resided there since the days of the early settlements. His grandfather, Francis Dana, had been the first American minister to Russia and later became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. His father was distinguished as a man of letters. He entered Harvard College in 1831, but near the beginning of his third year, an attack of measles left his eyesight so weak that study was impossible. Tired of the tedium of a slow convalescence, he decided on a sea voyage, and choosing to go as a sailor rather than a passenger. He shipped from Boston on August 14, 1834, on the brig Pilgrim, bound for the coast of California. His experiences for the next 2 years form the subject of the present volume. In the December following his return to Boston in 1836, Dana re-entered Harvard, the hero of his fellow students, graduating in the following June. He next took up the study of law, at the same time teaching elocution in the college, and in 1840 he opened an office in Boston. While in the law school, he had written out the narrative of his voyage, which he now published, and in the following year, 1841, issued The Seaman's Friend. Both books were republished in England and brought him an immediate reputation. After several years of the practice of law, during which he dealt largely with cases involving the rights of seamen, he began to take part in politics as an active member of the Free Soil Party. During the operation of the fugitive slave law, he acted as counsel in behalf of the fugitives Shadrach, Sims, and Burns, and on one occasion suffered a serious assault as a consequence of his zeal. His prominence in those cases, along with his fame as a writer, brought him much social recognition on his visit to England in 1856. 3 years later, his health gave way from overwork and he set out on a voyage around the world, revisiting California, where he made the observations which appear in the postscript to this book. On his return, Dana was appointed by Lincoln, United States District Attorney for Massachusetts. And in his arguments before the Supreme Court in Washington in connection with the prize causes dealing with the capture of private property at sea in time of war, he greatly increased an already brilliant legal reputation. After the close of the war, he resigned his office of district attorney, as he could not approve of President Johnson's policy of Reconstruction, and returned to private practice. This he relinquished in 1878 in order to go to Europe to devote himself to the preparation of a treatise on international law. But the actual composition of this work was little more than begun when he died in Rome, January 6th, 1882, and was buried in the Protestant cemetery, where lie the ashes of Keats and Shelley. The record of Dana's life agrees with the picture of his temperament which he unconsciously painted in his first and greatest book. The ready sympathy for the suffering and the oppressed, the courage, unselfishness, and fair-mindedness which he exhibited on the merchant vessel when a boy of 20 continued to characterize him throughout his long and distinguished career as lawyer and citizen. The merit of 2 years before the Mast was recognized in both America and England immediately after its appearance, and it at once took rank as the most vivid and accurate picture in literature of the side of life it sought to portray. W. Clark Russell, himself one of the best writers of sea stories in English, called it the greatest sea book that was ever written in any language. And the convincing detail of its narrative led to comparisons with the masterpiece of Defoe. Its value and interest today are even greater than they were when it was written, for while the purely human element remains the same, the account of the routine on board the old sailing ships, the picture of the trading on the coast of California, and the description of that country in the days before the discovery of gold had transformed its civilization, have all acquired a historical importance. Much is added also by the unaffected literary skill of the narrator. Such episodes as the flogging of Sam and John the Swede, the dry gale off Point Conception, the wedding fandango at Santa Barbara, the Kanakas in the oven, the funeral in San Pedro, the rounding of Cape Horn in the Alert, have passed into the list of the memorable things in literature. Preface. I am unwilling to present this narrative to the public without a few words and explanation of my reasons for publishing it. Since Mr. Cooper's Pilot and Red Rover, there have been so many stories of sea life written that I should really think it unjustifiable in me to add one to the number without being able to give reasons in some measure warranting me in so doing. With the single exception, as I am quite confident, of Mr. Ames' entertaining but hasty and desultory work, called Mariner's Sketches, all the books professing to give life at sea have been written by persons who have gained their experience as naval officers or passengers, and of these, there are very few which are intended to be taken as narratives of facts. Now, in the first place, the whole course of life and daily duties, the discipline, habits, and customs of a man of war are very different from those of the merchant service. And in the next place, however entertaining and well written these books may be, and however accurately they may give sea life as it appears to their authors, it must still be plain to everyone that a naval officer who goes to sea as a gentleman, with his gloves on, as the phrase is, and who associates only with his fellow officers and hardly speaks to a sailor except through a boatswain's mate, must take a very different view of the whole matter from that which would be taken by a common sailor. Besides, the interest which everyone must feel in exhibitions of life in those forms in which he himself has never experienced it, there has been of late years a great deal of attention directed toward common seamen, and a strong sympathy awakened in their behalf. Yet I believe that with the single exception which I have mentioned, there has not been a book written professing to give their life and experiences by one who has been of them and can know what their life really is. A voice from the forecastle has hardly yet been heard. In the following pages, I designed to give an accurate and authentic narrative of a little more than 2 years spent as a common sailor before the mast in the American merchant service. It is written out from a journal which I kept at the time and from notes which I made of most of the events as they happened. And in it I have adhered closely to fact in every particular, and endeavored to give each thing its true character. In so doing, I have been obliged occasionally to use strong and coarse expressions, and in some instances to give scenes which may be painful to nice feelings. But I have very carefully avoided doing so whenever I have not felt them essential to giving the true character of a scene. My design is, and it is this which has induced me to publish the book, to present the life of a common sailor at sea as it really is, the light and the dark together. There may be in some parts a good deal that is unintelligible to the general reader, but I have found from my own experience and from what I have heard from others that plain matters of fact in relation to customs and habits of life new to us and descriptions of life under new aspects act upon the inexperienced through the imagination, so that we are hardly aware of our want of technical knowledge. Thousands read the escape of the American frigate through the British Channel and the chase and wreck of the Bristol trader and the Red Rover, and follow the minute nautical maneuvers with breathless interest, who do not know the name of a rope in the ship, and perhaps with none the less admiration and enthusiasm for their want of acquaintance with the professional detail. In preparing this narrative, I have carefully avoided incorporating into it any impressions but those made upon me by the events as they occurred. Leaving to my concluding chapter, to which I shall respectfully call the reader's attention, those views which have been suggested to me by subsequent reflection. These reasons and the advice of a few friends have led me to give this narrative to the press, if it shall interest the general reader and call more attention to the welfare of seamen, or give any information as to their real condition which may serve to raise them in the rank of beings, and to promote in any measure their religious and moral improvement, and diminish the hardships of their daily life. The end of its publication will be answered. R.H.D. Jr., Boston, July 1840. 2 years before the Mast, Chapter 1, Departure. The 14th of August was the day fixed upon for the sailing of the brig Pilgrim on her voyage from Boston round Cape Horn to the western coast of North America. As she was to get under way early in the afternoon, I made my appearance on board at 12 o'clock in full sea rig and with my chest containing an outfit for a 2 or 3 years' voyage, which I had undertaken from a determination to cure, if possible, by an entire change of life, and by a long absence from books and study, a weakness of the eyes which had obliged me to give up my pursuits, and which no medical aid seemed likely to cure. The change from the tight dress coat, silk cap, and kid gloves of an undergraduate at Cambridge to the loose duck trousers, checked shirt, and tarpaulin hat of a sailor, though somewhat of a transformation, was soon made, and I supposed that I should pass very well for a jack-tar. But it is impossible to deceive the practiced eye in these matters, and while I supposed myself to be looking as salt as Neptune himself, I was no doubt known for a landsman by every one on board as soon as I hove in sight. A sailor has a peculiar cut to his clothes and a way of wearing them which a green hand can never get. The trousers tight round the hips and thence hanging long and loose round the feet, a superabundance of checked shirt, a long-crowned, well-varnished black hat worn on the back of the head with half a fathom of black ribbon hanging over the left eye, and a peculiar tie to the black silk neckerchief with sundry other minutiae, are signs, the want of which betray the beginner at once. Besides the points in my dress which were out of the way, doubtless my complexion and hands were enough to distinguish me from the regular salt, who, with a sunburnt cheek, wide step, and rolling gait, swings his bronzed and toughened hands athwart ships, half open, as though just ready to grasp a rope. With all my imperfections on my head, I joined the crew, and we hauled out into the stream and came to anchor for the night. The next day we were employed in preparations for sea, reeving, studding sail gear, crossing royal yards, putting on chafing gear, and taking on board our powder. On the following night I stood my first watch. I remained awake nearly all the first part of the night from fear that I might not hear when I was called, and when I went on deck, so great were my ideas of the importance of my trust that I walked regularly fore and aft the whole length of the vessel, looking out over the bows and taffrail at each turn, and was not a little surprised at the coolness of the old salt whom I called to take my place, in stowing himself snugly away under the long boat for a nap. That was a sufficient lookout, he thought, for a fine night at anchor in a safe harbor. The next morning was Saturday, and a breeze having sprung up from the southward, we took a pilot on board, hove up our anchor, and began beating down the bay. I took leave of those of my friends who came to see me off and had barely opportunity to take a last look at the city and well-known objects, as no time is allowed on board ship for sentiment. As we drew down into the lower harbor, we found the wind ahead in the bay and were obliged to come to anchor in the roads. We remained there through the day and a part of the night. My watch began at 11 o'clock at night, and I received orders to call the captain if the wind came out from the westward. About midnight, the wind became fair, and having called the captain, I was ordered to call all hands. How I accomplished this I do not know, but I am quite sure that I did not give the true hoarse boatswain call of all hands, up anchor, ahoy. In a short time everyone was in motion, the sails loosed, the yards braced, and we began to heave up the anchor, which was our last hold upon Yankee land. I could take but little part in all these preparations. My little knowledge of a vessel was all at fault. Unintelligible orders were so rapidly given and so immediately executed. There was such a hurrying about and such an intermingling of strange cries and stranger actions that I was completely bewildered. There is not so helpless and pitiable an object in the world as a landsman beginning a sailor's life. At length those peculiar long-drawn sounds which denote that the crew are heaving at the windlass began, and in a few moments we were under way. The noise of the water thrown from the bows began to be heard. The vessel leaned over from the damp night breeze and rolled with the heavy ground swell, and we had actually begun our long, long journey. This was literally bidding good night to my native land. Chapter 2, First Impressions, Sail Ho. The first day we passed at sea was the Sabbath, as we were just from port, and there was a great deal to be done on board. We were kept at work all day, and at night the watches were set and everything put into sea order. When we were called aft to be divided into watches, I had a good specimen of the manner of a sea captain. After the division had been made, he gave a short characteristic speech, walking the quarter-deck with a cigar in his mouth and dropping the words out between the puffs.